Growing up, there was no thought worse than the one that has plagued me since middle school. The thought that nobody loves me. It has been a recurring thought in the back of my mind for years, sometimes hundreds of times a day, and there really is no thought more painful than the idea that you are unlovable. What makes this pain seem even more unbearable is how easy it is to indulge and dwell on these feelings. It lingers in the recesses of your subconscious to manifest that doubt and shame we all carry with us. Over the years, this has become my terrible go-to self-attack in low moments when I feel isolated, depressed, anxious, or insecure. But sadly, I know I am not the only one, for this is one of the most common cognitive distortions, that of negative self-talk. What makes this thought so detrimental is that the feeling is almost no bearing in reality, and no purpose other than to deeply wound our souls, making us feel undeserving of love, and that no one has a genuine concern for us. This negative self-talk can also hurt our interpersonal relationships, but also derail what goals we may have. In her book, Conquer Your Inner Critical Voice, psychologist Lisa Firestone conducted research using a scale of measured individual self-destructive thoughts. She found the most common critical thought people had toward themselves was that they are different from other people. As human beings, we depend on social interactions to satisfy our basic need for acceptance. We are a social species, and still every one of us feels that we don't fit in, that we are not accepted, that we are alone. Ruth Sutherland, the chief executive officer of Relate, conducted a survey study of millions of people. The results found that 1 in 10 people didn't feel like they had a close friend, while 1 in 5 never or rarely felt loved. So while we may feel alone in thinking nobody loves me, in actuality, we have that common struggle with all humanity. The way we perceive ourselves as an outcast, rejected, disliked, or cast aside has much less to do with our external circumstances and everything to do with an internal negative voice we all possess. This negative voice exists in all of us, reminding us constantly that we aren't good enough and don't deserve what we long for in life. Though we may try and drown out this voice, it tends to be louder than anything else. This voice often tends to be more critical at different points in our lives depending on our emotional vulnerability. But as long as we are listening to this negative voice that twists our reality, we cannot really trust our perceptions of what others think of us, nor do we have a realistic perception of the world. As Dr. Lisa Firestone put in her article, A Way Out of Loneliness, it's helpful to recognize that loneliness is very much a state of mind, and unfortunately, that mind is, in effect, lying to us. Chances are it is this negative self-talk that we engage in, which we tell ourselves nobody loves me. It's also this voice that instructs us to avoid situations where we'd get to know people and create meaningful relationships. It isolates us with its perpetual stream of self-shaming observations and self-limiting advice, leaving us anxious, depressed, and stifled. In turn, it convinces us of our self-fulfilling prophecy of loneliness. This is a common cognitive distortion or logical fallacy called all-or-nothing thinking. It's a very common fallacy in which we polarize everything into extreme opposites and skip over all the other possibilities in the middle ground between them, let alone the possibilities that might be outside of the false binary. This distorted thinking has many destructive effects. Once we lose confidence of our sense of self, we no longer act like ourselves. We may even achieve the outcome our critical inner voice warned us about, feeling isolated or finding it difficult to connect with others. This voice may not even be overt in its methods. It can be a highly subconscious part of our thought process, making it hard to recognize. Sometimes it operates like a subtle filter through which we perceive the world. And by the time our critical inner voice builds up the case of why no one cares about us, we've lost touch with reality. And we blindly move forward believing every negative thought about ourselves that this voice has said to us. We're so quick to indulge in its claims that we mistake them for our real point of view. Because of this, it can be difficult to notice that this voice has seeped in, and it's even harder to peel away the self-image that it has constructed for us. So to combat this dark inner voice, we need to recognize when it's operating and understand where it manifests from. The critical inner voice starts to take shape early in our lives. It's built out of any hurtful negative attitudes that we were exposed to in childhood, especially from a significant caretaker. If a parent thought we were lazy or stupid, then we tend to incorporate these attitudes toward ourselves on an unconscious level throughout our lives. We tend to also be influenced by how our parents felt towards themselves. If they had low self-esteem, then we tend to take on some of their self-critical perceptions as our own. These self-perceptions may also have been reinforced by many other social experiences we have had wherever we felt put down, rejected by both peers or authority figures. These interactions give credence to this voice and reinforce its message of isolation and loneliness. Being alone isn't necessarily the issue. It's the filter of seeing ourselves as alone that must be challenged. People who see themselves as alone see the world as a lonely and careless place. Some of the psychological effects of feeling lonely include focusing on exclusion instead of inclusion. In other words, we may be far more likely to notice the one time someone doesn't invite us out versus the 5 times they did. This focus leads us to misremembering and reframing the past within this distorted and lonely worldview. As loneliness researcher Dr. John T. Cacioppo put it, lonely individuals are more likely to construe their world as threatening, hold more negative expectations, and interpret and respond to ambiguous social behavior in a more negative, off-putting fashion, thereby confirming their constructual view of the world as threatening and beyond their control. If we start to see the world as not accepting of us, we are much more likely to act in ways that push away or alienate others, which creates a self-fulfilling prophecy. So we have to challenge that negative filter through which we see ourselves and the world around us. We need to accept that this negative voice is not really our own voice, but repressed feelings of insecurity. Only then can we start to separate it from our real point of view. We can notice when it attempts to reframe the filter through which we see ourselves and the world around us. And only then can we recognize how our actions are connected to our negative thoughts and feelings. But it is often hard to break free of this voice because when we listen to it, it reinforces the reality we have known. And to break free of that reality is scary because of the unknown elements. It is built into human consciousness to have a tendency to ignore the unknown because of the potential danger within it. But when we avoid uncertainty, we automatically fill them with negative possibilities. A very common example here is assuming the worst in other people's thoughts and feelings about yourself, and in their motives and intentions behind what they do or didn't do relative to you. Rather than accept our ignorance of what is really going on in someone else's mind, we project our own negative self-talk onto them and suspect or assume that this is their actual attitude. Part of the reason we do this is because we have convinced ourselves that it will somehow make us safer or better people, that we will be safer from betrayal and disappointment, or that we will be better people because we are being so vigilant against things that we might do to offend or disappoint others. We learn to do that very early in life, as a way of avoiding punishment, rejection, neglect, and it becomes an entrenched habit before we have the mental capacity to rationally analyze and counter it. The main method developed to confront and transform this inner voice is known as voice therapy. The first step is to get to know what your inner critic is telling you. Start to notice when your thought process shifts and your inner critic starts to invade your mind. Maybe you're on a date and it starts with, "She doesn't even like you. No one could ever like you." As an exercise, write down your critical inner voices as I statements. I'm not lovable. No one likes me. Then next to these voices, write down your thoughts as you statements. You're not lovable. No one likes you. This actually helps you start to separate your own sense of self from your inner critic within you. The second step is to think about where these critical attitudes come from. When people write down or say their voices out loud, they sometimes have insight into where these mean thoughts originated. Many people even start to imagine the voices coming from a figure in their lives, a parent who is always worried they never make friends, or whom was emotionally distant and never gave you a sense of approval. Identifying where your voices may have originally formed can help you have self-compassion and distinguish these old attitudes from your current reality and what you would like your reality to be. The third step is to talk back to your critical voice. This may sound capricious, but this step is often the hardest for people. But it is crucial that you stand up for yourself. Face the inner darkness that keeps you trapped within your own limitations. Vocalize or write down a more compassionate and realistic response to your inner voice. Once again, as an I statement, I'm unique and a worthy person who deserves friendship and love. I have the qualities that many people would appreciate if I make the effort to connect with them. I am deserving of love. The fourth step is to think about how your voices affects your actions as you come to know your voices. You'll get better at recognizing when and why they say the things it does. You can actively try to divert your mind and start to notice how this voice influences your behavior. It may tell you no one wants to be around you anyway, so you avoid social situations. If it tells you the world is rejecting you, you may find yourself acting a bit angrier in your daily interactions or a whole lot meaner to yourself. Try to take note of all the times your critical inner voice is driving your behavior. As you do this, adopt what Dr. Daniel Steigel calls the COAL, the COAL attitude, which stands for curious, open, accepting, and loving. Adopt this COAL attitude towards yourself. The final step, of course, is to change your behavior based on our newfound perspective. It is essential to challenge our behavior patterns that our negative voice has dictated to us. So if your inner critic tells you to stay in seclusion, defy it. At first, it can be a painful experience when you act against your inner voice. You should remember to practice self-compassion. Challenging your voices will stir up anxiety, sadness, and changing a behavior pattern can make the voice seem louder than ever, but only at first. The more actions you take against your inner critic, the more confident you will become. This voice will eventually fade in the background, and you will have reclaimed your identity, free from suppressed influences. As you challenge this negative self-talk, remember that you may feel that the voices are right about you. But always remember that you are not alone in this. At one point or another, everyone feels the exact same way. But if we are to strive for what we want in life, then we must challenge our perceived notion of the self. It is only through challenging ourselves that we grow as individuals. It is only growth that will lead you to feeling whole and loved, no matter what your inner voice is telling you, or whatever behaviors it is inspired to reinforce its perceptions. You can break free from that cycle you have imposed upon yourself. Within you is the strength to calmly quiet these destructive influences on your real self, and you will become stronger, more understood, and accessible to the world around you. No matter where in life this video finds you, remember that you are never alone. And even though I may never meet you, laugh with you, or hold you, I love you, and within you is always the power to love yourself.